beneath the mist-covered peaks of the Carpathian mountains, where the earth hums with the weight of forgotten civilizations, lies the story of a people who vanished yet refused to be erased, the Dacians. Tonight, we descend into that world. So, sit back. Close your eyes if you wish, and let the echoes of a lost empire guide you through time. The Dacians were neither fully barbarian nor entirely civilized. In the Roman sense, they were something in between, a bridge between the old tribal Europe and the organized empires that sought to consume it. Their story begins long before their name was written in Roman scrolls. High in the valleys of what is now Romania, life pulsed in rhythm with the mountains. Fires burned in circular sanctuaries, prayers rose to the unseen god Zalmoxis, and warriors painted in ash stood watch over stone fortresses hidden among pine and snow. To the Romans, they were mysterious and dangerous guardians of gold mines and secret faiths. To the Greeks, they were Thracians touched by something divine and untamable. The Dacians lived close to the stars and closer to their gods. Their priests, known as the Capnobatithe, the smoke walkers, believed the soul could ascend through the clouds to immortality. Death was not an ending, but a homecoming. And so their warriors fought with a strange calmness, smiling into battle, unafraid of the spear, unafraid of the grave. Some Roman soldiers whispered that they were not men at all, but spirits wrapped in flesh, protectors of a mountain that would not yield. As night falls across ancient Europe, one can almost hear them, the clang of iron falxes, the deep chant of rituals performed under starlight, and the soft whisper of wind through ruined citadels. The Dacians built their world in stone and faith, a civilization both fierce and fragile, destined to stand at the crossroads of destiny. But who were they truly? And what force allowed them to challenge Rome itself, the greatest power the ancient world had ever known? In the next breath of history, we move deeper into their origins, where myth and memory intertwine, and the line between legend and reality begins to blur, long before the Romans recorded their name. The ancestors of the Dacians walked through forests so ancient that even their own myths could not remember their beginning. The land was called Dacia, a place of high mountains, fertile plains, and dark rivers that seemed to guard secrets beneath their surface. Some scholars believe they descended from the Thracians, that great Indo-European family that once stretched from the Balkans to the Black Sea. Others suggest they emerged independently, born from the soil itself, molded by centuries of isolation among the Carpathian ridges. Whatever their origin, they grew into a people unlike any other, hard, mystical, and deeply connected to the unseen. Their language, lost now except for a few carved words, whispered through the valleys like an old hymn. Their homes were of wood and stone, built to resist both the cold winds and the empires that pressed ever closer from the south. Within these mountain fortresses, they shaped tools, weapons, and art that reflected a complex mind, fierce in war, but contemplative in faith. Archaeologists uncovered traces of silver cups, gold jewelry, and intricate pottery that glows beneath the soil, as if preserving the firelight of ancient nights. And in those same hills, shrines and sanctuaries reveal their devotion to the divine. Zalmoxis, the god, the man, the mystery stood at the heart of their belief. Some said he was once a mortal sage who transcended death and returned to teach immortality. Others believed he was a celestial being, a messenger between earth and eternity. To the Dacians, life was not measured in years, but in how close one stood to the eternal flame of the gods. They did not fear dying, for they believed that beyond the last breath awaited freedom, not darkness. It is said that when the Dacian warriors went to battle, they sang to Zalmoxis, asking not for victory but for passage, to fight well enough to be welcomed into his realm. Such faith gave them courage so absolute that even the Romans, disciplined and hardened as they were, could not comprehend it. And so the Dacians remained a riddle to all who met them, a civilization at the edge of history, half hidden in mist and myth. But as the world changed, their isolation would not last forever. Soon the south would stir, and the eagle of Rome would cast its shadow across the mountains of Dacia. The Carpathians were more than mere geography to the Dacians. They were alive, vast sentinels of stone that breathed mist and memory. Their curved walls shielded the Dacian heartland from invaders, creating a cradle of survival where ancient traditions endured long after others faded. Within these ranges, valleys folded like secrets, and rivers cut paths that glittered like veins of silver beneath the sun. Every forest whispered an oath to those who listened. Every cliff bore witness to centuries of human resilience. To live here required strength, but it also demanded reverence. The Dacians believed the mountains were sacred, dwelling places of gods and spirits who observed the lives of men with quiet judgment. They built fortresses that seemed to grow from the rock itself, Sarmizegetusa, Kostekti, Blederuich, rising like a prayer to the heavens. These citadels were not just military strongholds. They were centers of worship, of governance, of cosmic balance. The walls were angled with mathematical precision, the sanctuaries aligned with the stars, and the circular temples of andesite stone mirrored the order of the universe. In the silence of those ruins today, one can still sense the symmetry of belief and architecture intertwined. The Dacians did not separate the divine from the earthly. To plant a seed, to forge a blade, to carve a stone all were sacred acts, reflections of the eternal order. Travelers from distant lands spoke of a people both fierce and philosophical, who debated life and death as easily as they wielded swords. Their connection to nature was profound. They saw omens in the movement of clouds, in the call of birds, in the rhythm of thunder rolling across the peaks. Every storm was a conversation between man and God. In this communion with the natural world lay their strength and their isolation. For centuries, the mountains protected them from conquest, but they also imprisoned them in a world apart, a world the outside empires longed to reach. Beyond the southern horizon lay the restless power of Rome, expanding like a tide, absorbing tribes, kingdoms, and cultures into its relentless order. And as that tide rose, it inevitably turned its gaze toward the gold, the forests, and the indomitable spirit of Dacia. The age of silence in the mountains was ending, and a new era of collision was about to begin. Deep beneath the soil of Dacia ran veins of gold, so pure that legends claimed even the rivers carried traces of it. This wealth, hidden in the mountains of Transylvania, glimmered like a promise to any who dared to take it. For centuries, the Dacians mined it with reverence, not greed, believing gold to be a divine metal, a gift from the earth itself, to be used for ritual and symbol rather than commerce. Their artisans shaped it into spirals, bracelets, and icons, symbols of eternity, worn by priests and kings during ceremonies that blended astronomy, sacrifice, and song. But across the Danube, Rome watched. The empire that had already devoured Gaul, Greece, and Egypt now looked northward, where whispers spoke of a land overflowing with gold and guarded by mountain warriors. Roman traders brought tales of Dacian kings whose crowns gleamed brighter than Caesar's armor. To an empire built on conquest and tribute, this was irresistible. Rome's hunger for Dacian gold was not merely economic, it was spiritual. The Romans feared and admired what they could not control. The Dacians represented a mirror of Rome's own origins, proud, martial, and disciplined, but untouched by decadence. In their rituals, the Romans saw echoes of their own ancient piety, long forgotten in marble temples and senate halls. The first encounters were not wars, but whispers, envoys, merchants, and spies crossing the Danube disguised as traders. They returned with stories of temples without idols, of priests who spoke to the sky, and of kings who ruled not by decree but by divine right. Yet every story ended the same. The Dacians would not yield. When Roman expansion reached the northern frontier, the Danube became a line of tension, a shimmering border between ambition and defiance. Beyond it, Dacia stood unbowed, its people guided by gods older than Rome itself. The empire could not allow such independence to survive, not when its soldiers believed themselves invincible, not when the emperor's coffers ran low. And so the stage was set. The mountain sanctuaries that had once echoed with chants to Zalmoxis would soon ring with the sound of Roman drums. The gold that had symbolized divinity would become the currency of invasion. In the distance, the shadow of the eagle darkened the northern sky. Out of the forests and valleys of divided tribes rose a man whose name would echo through time. Before him, Dacia was a patchwork of chieftains, each ruling small territories bound by kinship but separated by pride. They fought among themselves as often as they traded, their unity as fragile as the mountain mist. But Barbista was different. Some said he was chosen by the gods. Others whispered that he was guided by the high priest Dacians, a sage said to possess knowledge of both the stars and the underworld. Together they forged a visioner, single Dacia, strong enough to stand against the world's greatest empire. Barbista did not rule through fear alone. He ruled through faith. Under his command, the Dacians renounced the old tribal feuds and turned their eyes toward a common destiny. Villages became fortresses, warriors became legions, and scattered clans became a nation. The priesthood of Zalmoxis sanctified his rise, declaring that divine favor rested upon the king who could bring harmony to the land. In his reign, discipline replaced chaos. The Dacians abandoned wine and indulgence, dedicating themselves to purity and strength. The forests became training grounds. The sanctuaries became places of council. Barabista's armies swelled, hardened by mountain winters and guided by spiritual resolve. With this newfound power, he turned outward. His armies crossed rivers and plains, subduing neighboring tribes and extending Dacian influence from the Black Sea to the heart of the Carpathians. Even Greek colonies on the coast, once untouchable, fell under his control. The Mediterranean world took notice. To the Romans, Barbista was both a threat and a curiosity, a barbarian who ruled like a philosopher king. His state was not built on greed but on sacred order, and that made him dangerous. When civil war tore Rome apart, Barbista saw opportunity. Some claim he planned to march south, to carve his own empire from Rome's chaos. But before that vision could unfold, betrayal struck. The same unity that he had built began to fracture from within. In a single year, Barbista was assassinated, and with him, the dream of a single eternal Dacia dimmed. Yet his legacy endured. The fortresses he built, the laws he established, and the faith he strengthened would outlive his reign, waiting for the day another leader would rise to finish what he began. After Barabista's death, Dacia fell into silence, not the peace of triumph but the uneasy calm of disunity. The mighty realm he had built, stretching from the Danube to the Black Sea, splintered into pieces, each ruled by petty kings claiming to be his true heir. His assassination had not only ended a man's life, had shattered an idea. The priests of Zalmoxis withdrew into the mountains, guarding their secrets and waiting for signs of divine renewal, while the warriors who once stood united under one banner turned their swords upon one another. Yet, even in its fragmentation, Dacia remained a land of power and mystery. The Romans watched carefully from across the river, aware that the tribes north of the Danube, though divided, were not broken. In the shadow of their stone fortresses, the Dacians still believed they were chosen by their gods, and that belief made them dangerous. Decades passed, and Rome's attention turned elsewhere, to civil wars, to Cleopatra, to emperors rising and falling. But the Carpathians did not forget. A new generation of chieftains rose, their ambitions tempered by the lessons of Burebistas' fate. They rebuilt fortresses and reawakened the priesthood, blending old rituals with new iron discipline. The Dacian religion deepened its hold, teaching that death was only a transition to the world of the divine, a belief that made their warriors fearless in battle. To them, no Roman army, no steel, no empire could conquer men who saw dying as ascension. This faith, this fusion of spiritual and military purpose, became the heart of Dacian resilience. As the first century approached, a new name began to spread among the tribes. He would become the heir of Burebistas' vision, a leader both cunning and courageous, who could unite the fractured Dacian world once again. But his rise would not come easily. He inherited a land scarred by betrayal, surrounded by enemies, and shadowed by the unstoppable expansion of Rome. To the south, the legions had crossed into Dacia, their banners black with the eagle of empire. The clash was inevitable. The Dacians, shaped by their forests and gods, would not kneel easily, and Rome, master of the world, would not tolerate defiance. The stage was set for one of history's most brutal confrontations, war not just of armies, but of faith, destiny, and survival. The rise of Decebalus was not a sudden event, but a slow gathering of storms over the mountains. He emerged from the mists of Dacian legend, a figure, both warrior and philosopher, schooled by priests in the ways of Zalmoxis, and trained by chieftains in the art of war. His eyes were said to burn like the forges of Sarmizegetusa, his voice commanding yet calm, a man who could silence a room of feuding nobles with a single word. The Dacians had grown weary of division. Their lands had been raided, their forts burned, their people enslaved by those who traded with Rome. Decebalus promised something rare: unity through pride, not fear. He did not speak of gold or conquest, but of the spirit of Dacia, the belief that their land was sacred, chosen, and worth dying for. He rebuilt Sarmizegetusa, Regia, not just as a stronghold, but as a symbol, a temple fortress that merged faith and power. Stone walls rose high in the forests, wrapped in mist, guarded by sacred fires that never went out. Priests walked among soldiers, whispering prophecies and chants, teaching that each man was a vessel of the divine. This fusion of religion and resistance gave the Dacians an edge Rome could not understand. Their courage bordered on madness, their defiance felt eternal. When the first Roman incursions came, Decebalus struck not like a king, but like a ghost. His armies appeared and vanished in the thick forests, ambushing supply lines, burning camps, vanishing before the legions could form ranks. He used the mountains as weapons, the rivers as traps, the knight as an ally. Rome underestimated him, as it had underestimated every northern people before him. But Decebalus was no mere barbarian chieftain. He studied Rome, learned its weaknesses, and mirrored its discipline with native cunning. For a time, it worked. Even emperors took note of his name. Peace treaties were signed, gold was exchanged, and Rome treated him as an equal, not a subject. But peace with Rome was never peace, was a pause before the storm. The Dacians grew stronger, richer, more defiant, and as Decebalus fortified his kingdom deep beneath the earth, miners struck something that would change everything: veins of pure gold, running through the Transylvanian mountains like veins of fire. Rome could not ignore that. The empire's hunger had found its next feast, and Decebalus, unknowingly, had given them the reason to return in force. The discovery of gold beneath Dacia's mountains transformed the region from a distant frontier into Rome's obsession. Word spread quickly through imperial circles of the riches, buried in the heart of Transylvania gold, so pure it needed little refining, rivers lined with shining dust, and veins so thick they glimmered even by torchlight. Merchants whispered that Dacia was a land where the earth itself bled treasure, and senators in Rome began to see it not as a barbarian kingdom, but as a mine waiting to be conquered. Emperor Domitian first sent his legions northward, testing the Dacian strength, and found that Decebalus was not a man easily broken. The Dacians fought with a ferocity that stunned even seasoned Roman commanders. Their curved falx blades could shear through shields and armor. Their warriors howled prayers to Zalmarxus as they charged, and their terrain swallowed whole cohorts like a living creature. The Roman legions returned south, battered and humiliated. In the Senate, Domitian's reputation suffered, while Decebalus's fame grew even among Rome's enemies. He became a symbol of resistance, a barbarian king who had forced the empire to negotiate rather than destroy. Rome was forced into a peace that paid Dacia annual subsidies and sent engineers to help rebuild its cities. An insult to imperial pride, but a triumph for Dacia. Yet he knew this peace was temporary. Rome does not forgive humiliation. It merely delays revenge. While Decebalus used Rome's gold and engineers to strengthen his defenses, he also prepared for the inevitable. In Sarmizegetusa, the mountain capital, craftsmen built hidden chambers, sacred sanctuaries, and intricate water systems to outlast siege. The walls were reinforced with stone and timber in layers that defied catapults. The priesthood saw visions of fire and iron descending from the south, but they also spoke of endurance that Dacia's soul could never be conquered as long as her mountains stood. Meanwhile, Rome was changing. Domitian fell, and a new emperor would soon rise, one who saw conquest not as glory but as necessity. His name was Trajan, a soldier's emperor, patient, calculating, and relentless. And when his eyes turned toward the Carpathians, he did not see a kingdom, he saw unfinished business, a scar on Rome's pride that needed erasing. The storm was coming, and both Decebalus and Trajan knew that only one of them would emerge from its standing. When Trajan became emperor, Rome's heartbeat quickened with the rhythm of conquest once more. Unlike his predecessors, Trajan was not a man of luxury or excess. He was a soldier molded by years on the frontier, a commander who marched beside his men and understood both the glory and the price of empire. He looked north across the Danube and saw Dacia not as a threat, but as a challenger, kingdom rich in gold, defiant in spirit, and dangerous in its unity. For Trajan, to conquer Dacia would not merely expand Rome's borders. it would restore the empire's dignity. He began his preparations in silence, studying every report, every map, every failure that had come before him. Engineers constructed massive bridges over the Danube, monuments of Roman ingenuity that seemed to defy nature itself. Legionaries drilled endlessly, their discipline sharpened into precision. When the legions finally moved, it was not an invasion. It was an unstoppable tide of iron and will. Decebalus had expected them, yet even he could not have imagined the scale of Rome's determination. From the southern plains came the thunder of siege engines, the grinding of wheels carrying towers and catapults, and the steady march of tens of thousands of soldiers. The earth itself seemed to tremble beneath their feet. But the Dacians were not afraid. They had seen storms before. In the mountain fortresses, horns sounded across the valleys, summoning warriors from every tribe. Men painted their faces with ash, women lit sacred fires, and priests raised their arms to the heavens, calling on Zalmoxes to protect his people. The first clashes were brutal and chaotic. Roman formations advanced like machines, precise and relentless, while Dacian fighters struck with wild courage, using the forests to their advantage, melting into the terrain, appearing from nowhere to strike and vanish again. Yet for every Roman that fell, two more took his place. Slowly, the imperial weight began to press inward. The rivers ran red with blood, and smoke coiled above the hills where once stood proud fortresses. Still, Decebalus refused to yield. Each defeat became a lesson, each loss a spark of resolve. He withdrew deeper into the mountains, where the forests grew thick and the air itself seemed ancient. There, he prepared for a final defense, not of land, but of legacy, for he knew that what Rome truly sought was not victory, but the erasure of Dacia's soul. The Second Dacian War began not with words or treaties, but with silence, the kind that descends before cataclysm. Trajan had already tasted the difficulty of subduing Dacia once, but now he returned with absolute resolve. The Roman Empire mobilized on a scale rarely seen before, over 10 legions, auxiliaries from across the provinces, and a fleet to support them along the Danube. They came not to negotiate, not to humiliate, but to annihilate. For Trajan, this was a holy mission, the cleansing of Rome's pride. For Decebalus, it was destiny's final trial. As the first snow melted on the Carpathians, the Roman war machine began its ascent into the Dacian highlands. Bridges of oak and stone carried legions across raging rivers, and their standards, golden eagles glinting in the cold sun, pierced the horizon like omens. The clash that followed was not merely war, it was elemental. The mountains roared with the echo of catapults, the hiss of burning pitch, and the screams of men locked in hand-to-hand struggle. Dacian folkses met Roman gladi in sparks of steel and blood. Every tree, every rock became a weapon, every path a battlefield. But the weight of empire was unrelenting. Fortress after fortress fell: Castecti, Bladaru, Piatra, Rosic, one burning as the legions pressed deeper into Dacian territory. Sarmizegetusa, Regia, the sacred capital, became the heart of resistance. Its terraces, temples, and walls, carved into the mountain itself, stood as a final testament to Dacian endurance. Inside, Decebalus and his priests prepared for the end. They performed the ancient rites of Zalmoxes, offering sacrifices to ensure the soul of Dacia would survive beyond death. The Romans encircled the mountain, cutting off water supplies, breaching the sanctuaries, tearing down stone by stone the symbols of a civilization that refused to bow. The fires that consumed Sarmizegetusa could be seen for miles, painting the sky with the color of ruin. In the chaos, Decebalus escaped with a handful of loyal warriors, vanishing into the wilds. Rome's victory seemed complete, yet Trajan knew the war would not end until Decebalus himself was gone. What followed was a hunt merciless and methodicless. Roman cavalry scoured the forests, guided by informants and deserters. In those final days, Decebalus ceased to be a king. He became a ghost pursued by an empire, carrying with him the last spark of Dacian freedom. The final chapter of Decebalus's life unfolded not upon a battlefield, but in the wilderness among the same mountains that had once crowned his glory. Hunted, exhausted, and betrayed, he moved through the dense forests like a shadow, his armor dulled, his eyes hollow yet unbroken. Behind him, the remnants of his loyal guard fell one by one, cut down by Roman scouts who fanned out like wolves. The empire's vengeance was precise. Trajan would settle for nothing less than the head of the man who had defied him. Yet even in flight, Decebalus refused surrender. The mountains had raised him, the gods had blessed him, and the blood of his people flowed in his veins like fire. When the Romans finally cornered him near the banks of the Sarmizegetusa river, he did not weep nor beg. Surrounded by legionaries, his choices narrowed to capture or eternity. In one final act of defiance, Decebalus drew his dagger, pressed it against his throat, and fell upon it before the enemy could touch him. His body slumped to the ground, but his spirit ascended into legend. When the Romans found him, they took his head, as was their custom, and carried it back to Trajan as proof of victory. It was displayed in Rome with ceremony, a grim trophy of conquest. But in that moment, even among the marble triumphs and roaring crowds, a silence hung in the emperor's heart. Rome had won, yet something vast had been extinguished. The Dacian War had cost the empire dearly tens of thousands of lives, rivers of blood, and years of relentless campaigning. Trajan's victory was immortalized on the spiraling column that still stands in Rome today. Its stone reliefs telling the story of battles fought and fortresses burned. Yet within those carvings, the faces of the Dacians remain strangely noble, not broken, not savage, but dignified in their fall. Perhaps even Rome understood that Dacia had not been truly conquered, it had been consumed. Over the ashes of Sarmizegetusa, the Romans built their own capital, Traiana, planting their colonies atop the bones of a vanished kingdom. But beneath the roads and temples, under the weight of empire, the Dacian spirit lingered unseen, unbowed, whispering through the mountains that no conquest lasts forever, and no empire escapes the fate it once delivered to others. With the death of Decebalus and the fall of Sarmizegetusa, Dacia was absorbed into the Roman world, but its soul remained restless. The legions built roads that cut through sacred groves, erected stone cities upon ancient sanctuaries, and mined the mountains that had once been worshipped as living gods. Roman engineers brought their order, their baths, their amphitheaters, but beneath the surface, the land still hummed with the pulse of its old faith. The Dacians who survived the wars were not erased. They adapted, blending their traditions with those of their conquerors. In the bustling streets of Traiana, Latin words mingled with Dacian chants. Roman statues stood beside old idols of Zalmoxis, and soldiers from Gaul, Hispania, and Syria mingled with local tribesmen who still carried the look of the mountains in their eyes. Rome called it civilization, but for many it felt like captivity wrapped in marble. The gold mines of the Apennine Mountains flowed endlessly, feeding the empire's greed, yet each ounce carried the silent memory of the blood spilled to obtain it. The Romans renamed the rivers, redrew the borders, and tried to overwrite the past with inscriptions and monuments. But history is not so easily tamed. The Dacians who remained in the highlands whispered stories of their fallen king, of the holy fire that once burned in Sarmizegetusa, of the promise that their spirit would one day return. Even the Roman settlers began to sense the eerie stillness in the forests, the strange songs carried by the wind, the feeling that the mountains themselves were watching. Centuries later, as Roman power began to wane, Dacia would again become a frontier, a place where civilization met its own limits. The legions stationed there grew weary, surrounded by hostile tribes and haunted by the vastness of the wilderness. Rome's empire stretched too far, its strength spread too thin. When the barbarians came from the north and east, they found Dacia ready to shed its Roman mask. The cities fell quickly, the roads cracked, and the monuments crumbled, reclaimed by the soil. Yet through it all, something ancient endured, the unbroken thread of a people who refused to vanish. The Romans had come to conquer Dacia, but in the end it was Dacia that outlasted Rome. As the centuries passed, the memory of the Dacians did not die. It dissolved into legend, reshaping itself within the shadows of time. When Rome withdrew its legions around the year 275, the empire's grip finally loosened, leaving behind stone ruins, abandoned mines, and the echoes of a forgotten language. But in the mountains and valleys, the descendants of Dacia endured farmers, herders, and wanderers who carried fragments of their ancestors' songs. The land began to heal, but not to forget. The Roman colonists who had settled there mingled with the native population, creating something new, a hybrid people, half Roman, half Dacian, whose identity was neither fully conqueror nor conquered. This fusion birthed a strange endurance, a quiet continuity that survived long after the empires crumbled. Travelers from distant lands spoke of ghostly fortresses hidden in the mist, of sacred stones that glowed in moonlight, and of old men who still whispered the name of Zalmoxes in their prayers. The faith had changed, taking on new names and symbols, but its essence remained the same: belief in rebirth, in immortality, in the eternal return of the spirit. Historians later called the region Roman Dacia, but to those who lived there, it was still the land of the ancestors, the realm between heaven and earth. The Roman temples fell, yet their columns were reused in churches. Latin words devolved into a new language, one that carried the rhythm of both Rome and the mountains. The world beyond shifted endlessly. Goths, Huns, and Avars swept across the plains, but the core of the land resisted absorption. In hidden valleys, ancient rites survived beneath Christian festivals. The circle dances once held for Zalmoxes continued under new names. The Dacian wolf, once a symbol of war, became a guardian spirit in folklore. Even when no one remembered the true boundaries of Dacia, its essence persisted in the people's stories, in their resilience, in the way they spoke to the earth as if it were alive. The Romans had tried to transform Dacia into a province of their world, but instead Dacia transformed Rome's legacy, turning its ruins into roots, its conquest into continuity. What had once been an empire's victory became the foundation of a nation's soul, whispering across generations that no civilization truly dies if its spirit remembers who it was. Long after Rome's departure, Dacia became a crossroads of migrating peoples, a silent stage where new civilizations rose and fell, leaving traces that layered upon one another like sediment in ancient stone. The Goths came first, fierce and hungry, sweeping down from the north. They looted the old Roman towns and fortified settlements, but found little left worth keeping. Yet even they spoke of the strange stillness of the Carpathian valleys, the way fog moved like breath over the ruins of Sarmizegetusa, and the haunting sense that the land itself watched them. When the Huns thundered in from the steppes, their horses stirring the earth like a storm, they too passed through Dacia as though it were a threshold between worlds. None could claim it fully. The forests resisted intrusion, swallowing armies and hiding villages that seemed untouched by time. The people who lived there no longer called themselves Dacians, but something of that lineage pulsed in their blood, a quiet defiance, an instinct to endure without surrender. Centuries blurred into one another, empires came and went, and still the mountains stood, holding the memories of gods and kings. Byzantine chroniclers wrote of a mysterious people living beyond the Danube, who spoke a language reminiscent of Latin yet carried the customs of an older age. They could not name them, but they sensed an ancient continuity. The Romans had left their laws, their speech, their roads, but the Dacians had left their silence, their roots, their spirit of survival. The combination of the two had birthed something new, something that could bend without breaking. Through invasions and migrations, the land became a mirror of impermanence. Every conqueror who entered Dacia left believing they had tamed it, and every one departed leaving behind only bones and echoes. The soil seemed to absorb their histories, growing heavier, more sacred, with each passing age. Travelers in later centuries would describe the air of Dacia as old, as if time itself moved slower there. It was said that the wind carried whispers in a tongue no one remembered, yet everyone understood. Somewhere beneath the ruins and forests, the heart of Dacia still beat steady, patient, waiting for the moment when the world would once again remember its name. By the early Middle Ages, Dacia had become a memory more than a map. A word whispered by monks in candlelit scriptoria and travelers who crossed the Danube in search of legends. Yet in the highlands and remote valleys, that memory lived as blood and breath. The Romans had long vanished, their monuments crumbling beneath moss and vine. But their language endured, shaped, simplified, carried in the speech of shepherds and farmers who did not know they were preserving history. Out of that survival came the ancestors of a new people, the Romanians, born from the fusion of Rome's discipline and Dacia's endurance. They did not call themselves conquerors or heirs. They simply endured, building wooden churches where temples once stood, carving crosses into stones that still bore the markings of Zion. Christianity had come, but beneath its hymns beat the same belief in eternal return, in the cyclical dance between life and death. To the outside world, these lands seemed wild and isolated, a forgotten edge of Europe, but in truth they were alive with stories. Tales of Decebalus transformed into parables of lost kings. The Dacian wolf became a guardian spirit who walked the ridgelines at night, and the mountains themselves were said to breathe, guarding treasures left hidden by the ancient ones. Travelers spoke of glowing lights in the forests, of ruins that hummed softly at dusk, and of villagers who left offerings on certain stones during the full moon. The modern world called it superstition, but the locals knew it as remembrance. Through the centuries, wave after wave of invaders, came the Magyars, the Mongols, the Turks, and each left scars upon the land, yet none could fully erase what lay beneath. The people of Dacia's shadow did not resist with armies, but with patience. Their strength was not conquest, but continuity. They survived by adapting, blending old with new, turning faith into folklore and loss into legend. When medieval chroniclers finally wrote of these mountain dwellers, they described them as those who speak the tongue of Rome but live as the children of the forest. They were neither Romans nor barbarians, they were something older, something elemental. And though the world had forgotten the name Dacia, the land had not. It still remembered, and through its people, it still spoke. The centuries that followed saw Dacia's ancient heart buried deeper beneath the layers of history, yet its pulse never ceased. As the medieval kingdoms of Wallachia, Moldavia, and Transylvania emerged, they carried fragments of Dacian identity without even knowing it. Their banners bore wolves and suns, their customs echoed pagan rites disguised under Christian ceremony, and their songs still spoke of the mountains as living gods. The land itself remained a fortress, its forests thick and impassable, its rivers cutting through stone like veins of memory. Foreign powers Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, later the Habsburgs all sought to possess it, but Dacia's descendants had inherited the endurance of stone. They could be taxed, conquered, and divided, but never broken. In the villages, old women still lit candles at stones that predated churches, murmuring prayers in words whose meanings had long been lost. Shepherds crossing the Carpathians claimed to see lights flickering near ancient ruins, guiding them safely through storms. These were not ghosts, they said, but the spirits of the ancestors, the Dacians who refused to rest. The scholars of the Renaissance rediscovered the old name Dacia in crumbling Roman texts and began to wonder what had become of its people. The answer, they realized, was not in the ruins, but in the living. The Romanian language, still resonant with Latin structure, yet filled with unfamiliar rhythms, stood as proof of unbroken descent. The Dacian spirit had not died. It had transformed, moving unseen beneath the skin of nations. The mountains remained the silent witnesses of this continuity. Those same peaks that had sheltered Decebalus and his warriors now guarded peasants and rebels alike. Empires rose and fell around them, but the land did not forget. In the stillness of twilight, when fog coiled through the valleys, one could almost hear the echo of bronze shields, the whisper of priests chanting to Za, and the distant howl of the wolf that once led armies into battle. Time had changed everything, and yet nothing. The same defiance, the same endurance, the same quiet belief that no conqueror could claim the soul of the Carpathians, these remained. And though no empire bore the name of Dacia anymore, every generation born beneath those mountains carried a spark of its eternal flame, hidden yet alive, waiting for the world to remember what it once was. By the dawn of the modern era, the echoes of Dacia had woven themselves so deeply into the fabric of Romania that they could no longer be separated. The people no longer spoke the name Decebalus with the same reverence their ancestors once did, but his defiance lived within their hearts like an inherited instinct. When foreign empires pressed upon them, Ottoman to the south, Habsburg to the west, Russian to the east, they responded not with empires of their own, but with endurance, that same unyielding Dacian patience that outlasted storms. The Carpathians became their silent allies once more, offering refuge to rebels, monks, and dreamers who refused submission. Villages hidden deep within the mountains continued to guard traditions that stretched back to a time before Rome. There were festivals marking the changing of the seasons, where fire and circle dances mirrored ancient solar rites. There were chants sung at funerals that spoke of the soul's journey to another world, echoing the doctrine of Zalmoxis. Even Christianity, dominant and enduring, could not extinguish these traces. It absorbed them, reshaping them into its own sacred rhythm. Travelers from Europe marveled at the peculiar fusion they found. Hera people, Roman in tongue, Eastern in faith, and yet different from all around them. To them, Romania was a mystery, a living relic of an ancient world that refused to die. Scholars began to piece together fragments of the old Dacian world, uncovering ruins in the hills, pottery etched with symbols of sun and wolf, coins bearing the proud faces of forgotten kings. Each discovery added another thread to the tapestry of identity, binding past to present. The Romantic era of the 19th century rekindled the legend. Writers and nationalists spoke of Dacia not as a dead kingdom, but as the true origin of Romanian pride. Paintings depicted Decebalus as a tragic hero. Poets wrote of the mountains as the guardians of a sacred past. It was as if the spirit of Dacia, dormant for centuries, had begun to stir once more through the dreams of its descendants. Empires still ruled them, but in their stories, their songs, and their silence, the Dacians were alive again, reborn in memory, awaiting the day when their land would once again belong to its own people. That day would come in the 19th century, when the tides of nationalism swept across Europe like a storm tearing down the old order. The Romanian lands, Wallachia, Moldavia, and Transylvania each bore scars of different masters, yet shared a heartbeat that pulsed with something older than any empire. It was the Dacian pulse, the rhythm of a people bound by the soil and the story of resistance. Leaders like Alexandru Ioan Cuza and later Carol I would rise not as conquerors but as unifiers. Men who spoke of nationhood not as conquest but as memory restored. The unification of 1859, the birth of modern Romania, was not merely a political event, it was the awakening of a buried civilization. In the minds of the people, the Dacians had finally returned. The nationalists invoked Decebalus as the first Romanian, the Carpathians as the eternal fortress, and the Roman inheritance as the bridge between East and West. This mythic synthesis became the backbone of Romanian identity. Dacian courage fused with Roman discipline, a dual ancestry that could stand proudly beside the great nations of Europe. Yet even as the world modernized, the ancient shadows never fully faded. Villagers still whispered of wolf spirits that guarded the forests, and old men told tales of mountain kings whose golden treasure still slept beneath Sarmizegetusa. Archaeologists unearthed fortresses and sacred sites that matched the legends, lending weight to what many had dismissed as myth. Dacia was no longer a ghosted, was proof of a continuity no empire had erased. But history, as always, demanded payment for pride. The wars of the 20th century shattered Europe's illusions of destiny, and Romania too was thrown into the crucible. Kingdoms rose and fell, borders shifted, and ideologies sought to redefine what it meant to be Romanian. Yet through it all, the Dacian flame refused to go out. Under communism, the regime tried to claim the Dacian past as its own, sculpting massive statues of Decebalus, rewriting history to glorify a lineage of resistance against imperial oppression. Even propaganda could not kill the truth. It only proved how deeply that ancient spirit still burned. For though centuries had passed, the land still remembered, and every mountain, every stone, still carried the weight of Dacia's unbroken dream today. As you stand among the ruins of Sarmizegetusa, time seems to dissolve into a soft, reverent silence. The grass grows over what was once a citadel, yet beneath every step lies the pulse of a kingdom that defied the world's greatest empire. The circular sanctuaries, carved from massive stone blocks, still align with the stars, as if the Dacians left behind a celestial signature to remind us that they once conversed with the cosmos. Some believe these ruins are more than the remnants of a city. They are an encoded message, a map of knowledge that predates Rome, possibly even Greece. Archaeologists debate whether the Dacian calendar, carved into the sacred site, hints at an astronomical precision far ahead of its time. The golden bracelets found in the region, crafted with breathtaking intricacy, speak of a civilization both mystical and refined. Others suggest they were offerings to Zalmoxis, buried to preserve divine favor when the empire's shadow fell over the mountains. And as the wind brushes through the valleys of Orosti, you can almost hear the faint echo of the Dacian horns the Carnix once used to strike terror into Roman ranks. The metal faces of dragons atop the horns symbolized the power of transformation, of life turning into wind, of mortal sound transcending into spiritual cry. The Dacians didn't just fight, they performed war as ritual, blending the material and the mystical into one. Even now, Romanian folklore is heavy with echoes of that union. The Doina, the sorrowful song of longing, carries the same melancholy that must have filled Dacian hearts as they watched their freedom burn. And when the people dance the hora, forming circles that mirror those ancient sanctuaries, they unknowingly keep the rhythm of their ancestors alive. To fall asleep to their history is to drift through layers of time, through iron and flame, through conquest and rebirth. The Dacians remind us that civilizations never truly vanish. They transform, re-emerge, and wait to be remembered. And perhaps that's why their story still whispers through the Carpathians, why their symbols appear in dreams, and why the silence of their ruins feels alive. For the Dacians, though conquered, were never lost. They became the memory of endurance itself. In the stillness of twilight, when mist coils between the ridges of the Carpathians and the forests hum with unseen life, one begins to understand why the Dacians were never truly gone. The land itself seems to breathe with their memory. Every river and hill bears a name that descends from their tongue. Every shadowed valley holds traces of their sanctuaries, and every spark of folklore carries their echo. The Romans built roads and cities, but the Dacians left behind something older, something that couldn't be conquered. A relationship with the land so profound it became indistinguishable from identity. The shepherds who wander the meadows of Transylvania still speak of the old ones who could summon storms and whisper to wolves. Remnants of Zalmoxian lore surviving beneath centuries of Christianity. Some researchers believe that the Dacian religion never died, merely changed its face, adopting new symbols, hiding old gods beneath saints and crosses. The wolf, for instance, once sacred as a totem of transformation and protection, survives today in Romanian folklore as both guardian and omen. Even the language carries its fingerprints, words that trace their roots, not to Latin or Slavic, but to something deeper, older, Dacian. It's as if the very air of the region preserves an ancestral code, resistant to time itself. The mountains of Busigi are perhaps the most enigmatic of all. Legends claim that beneath them lies an ancient structure and network of tunnels, chambers, and stone carvings that predate recorded history. Some say it was the final sanctuary of the Dacian priests, others that it guards the last remnants of their lost wisdom. In recent decades, whispers of hidden artifacts and strange discoveries have circulated, fueling theories of an ancient advanced culture that once thrived where Dacia stood. Whether myth or truth, the idea persists because it satisfies a deeper longing the human need to believe that greatness can sleep and still one day awaken. The Dacians may have fallen to Rome, but they endure in imagination, in spirit, in the invisible threads that tie modern Romania to its ancient soul. Their story is not one of disappearance, but of transformation, a civilization that learned to live within the silence of history, waiting patiently for the world to remember their name. As night deepens over the Carpathian peaks, one can almost sense the outline of that forgotten kingdom flickering beneath the stars. The Dacians, masters of the highlands, built their world not merely from stone and metal, but from belief, unshakable conviction that life and death were not opposites, but passages within a single eternal cycle. Zalmoxis had taught them that the soul does not perish, it transforms. When a Dacian fell in battle, he was not mourned but honored, for he had merely crossed into another realm. This philosophy infused their courage, making them fearless before Rome's legions. It also infused their art, their rituals, their architecture, each a mirror reflecting the divine order they believed structured the universe. Even their fortresses were not random constructions of defense, but symbols of cosmic harmony, positioned along sacred lines, aligned to the sun, the moon, and the constellations they revered. The Romans mistook this for superstition, but to the Dacians it was knowledge ancestral, intuitive, and sacred. As centuries passed and Christianity spread, the old symbols were absorbed rather than erased. Wooden churches rose where sanctuaries once stood, and beneath the crucifix, the old patterns persisted. The spiral of life, the wolf motif, the sun cross. The people prayed to Christ, but their prayers still carried the rhythm of mountain chants that predated scripture. In this way, Dacia became not a lost civilization, but a foundation stone for all that followed. When travelers today wander through Romanian villages, they encounter the same duality. The Dacians once embraced hardship and beauty, faith and mystery, life and death in perfect balance. Even the land itself participates in this legacy. It has a strange way of preserving memory. Artifacts emerge from the soil as if the earth were gently returning its secrets. Gold coils, iron blades, fragments of altars once kissed by sacred fire. Each discovery reminds the world that beneath every modern step lies an ancient pulse. And so, when you close your eyes tonight and imagine those mountains under the pale moonlight, think of the people who once walked them barefoot, unafraid, guided by stars and gods long forgotten by name but not by presence. For in every echo of wind through the fir trees, Dacia still breathes. There is a haunting continuity to the Dacian story, a thread that winds through every age, binding past to present with invisible strength. When historians speak of Dacia, they often reduce it to conquest and annexation, yet what truly endures cannot be mapped or measured. It lives in symbols, in whispers, in the slow rhythm of the land itself. The Dacians were never a people of abundance. They were a people of endurance. Their world was built on the harsh generosity of the mountains, where winter could be both enemy and teacher. From that struggle grew a philosophy of resilience, a worldview where strength came not from domination but from harmony with nature's chaos. This quiet defiance still defines the spirit of the region. In rural Romania, the rituals of sowing and harvest, of birth and burial, still carry echoes of Dacian belief, the idea that every act is sacred, every season divine. The dance of fire on winter nights, the songs sung to the moon, the bread broken to mark a journey's beginning, all these are fragments of a civilization that refused to die. And perhaps that is why modern Romanians often speak of their ancestry not as a distant legend but as a living heritage. The wolf banners may have fallen, the citadels turned to dust, but the essence remains in every gesture of reverence toward the earth. Some scholars argue that the Dacians' real gift to history was not gold or art, but perspective, understanding. That civilization is not defined by its monuments, but by its capacity to adapt, to absorb, to survive. Rome conquered Dacia with steel, yet it was Dacia that conquered Rome in memory. The Roman emperors who once celebrated their victory now lie silent beneath the same soil that holds the bones of the men they sought to erase. And in that silence, time has rendered its verdict. The Dacians did not vanish, they became the unseen architects of continuity, the silent ancestors of a nation that still carries their voice. So when you listen to the wind along the Transylvanian ridges, remember, it's not merely air moving through stone and pine. It is history breathing. It is Dacia whispering still. And so we arrive at the quiet end of the Dacian Chronicle, though endings in their world never truly existed. To the Dacians, time was not a straight path, but a circle, endlessly folding in on itself, where death was simply another door, and memory the bridge between worlds. That belief has outlived empires, revolutions, and the slow corrosion of centuries. It lingers in the soil of Romania, in the mist that clings to the ridges of the Carpathians at dawn, in the sound of bells echoing across valleys once lit by sacred fires. The ruins of Sarmizegetusa still rest beneath the open sky, their stones cool to the touch, as if holding within them the last warmth of forgotten prayers. Tourists walk among them now, cameras in hand, unaware that they tread on what was once considered the navel of a living cosmos. And yet, sometimes, when the wind stills, a strange hush falls, a silence that feels almost aware, as if the land itself remembers. The Romans built empires, the Dacians built eternity. One sought to impose its order upon the world, the other to understand its rhythm. And perhaps that is why, though Rome's monuments crumble and its language has splintered into dozens, the Dacian essence endures not in power, but in presence. Every story told in Romania about courage, about resistance, about love for the land, carries a spark of that origin. Every melody that mourns the passage of time or the loss of freedom echoes Decebalus's last defiance. The Dacians have become something beyond history, an idea, an inheritance of spirit. And if you listen closely, you can feel them still in the places untouched by modern noise, in the forests where fog moves like ancient breath, in the rivers that carve through stone as if tracing the veins of the earth itself. The world has forgotten many civilizations, but not this one, not completely. For Dacia is not merely a chapter in the past, it is a reminder that some stories refuse to die. They live in the soil, in the stars, and in the sleep of those who dream of forgotten worlds. So rest now, and let their echoes guide you. The Dacians are waiting, eternal and awake, in the silence between your heartbeats.